It's being called Boston's historic mayor's race, and it will be decided in 3 weeks. Historic because either Michelle Wu or Annissa Essaibi George will become the city's first woman mayor and first mayor of color. The early days of the race seemed defined by images of the two city council colleagues hugging. Since then, it's gotten a little more testy, but has still been a pretty civil affair. I'm Michael Jonas from CommonWealth magazine. This week on the podcast, we're sizing up the race with two people who know quite a lot about Boston politics. Joyce Faribault-Boehling is a veteran political strategist and writes a weekly column these days for the Boston Herald. Hey, Joyce, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
And John Connolly was a finalist in the last open race for mayor of Boston in 2013 when he ran against Marty Walsh. A former at-large city councilor, he's now running the education advocacy group School Facts Boston. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Michael. Happy to be here.
So everywhere we turn, we seem to be hearing about another big endorsement for Michelle Wu, who finished first in the September preliminary election. Joyce, why don't you just kick things off? Where do you think the race stands today?
Well, I'm not going to, bet anybody out or in yet. As John knows, we both were involved in the 2013 race, he running and me working with Charlotte Golar-Ritchie. I think that anything can happen. Now, I do agree that she's got a lot of endorsements, and one of the top would be the one from Kim Janey, and of course Ayanna Pressley has weighed in, and so all of Kim Janey's supporters now have piled on to support Michelle. And I have to say that Michelle actually was a favorite for mayor even when she wasn't running, to really be honest with you. To get to the mayor's office, you have to travel through the black and minority community. That is for sure. And so that'll really tell the tale of the tape, as it did when John ran against Marty, actually.
All right, John, where do you kind of see things right now?
Yeah, I think similar to Joyce, I'm not willing to say game over at this point. There's a lot of time left, but I think Michelle Wu has a decisive advantage at this point. When you look at what happened in the prelim and the two candidates that are left, it's very clear that black and brown voters are going to decide this race. Michelle Wu has padlocked progressive voters in this race. She is, outside of Elizabeth Warren, the progressive standard bearer in Massachusetts, and she has locked down progressive voters. Annissa Essaibi George has locked down sort of rooted, lifelong white Bostonians. And so you look at those two groups creating the base for each candidate respectively. Black and brown voters in Boston, both lifelong rooted black and brown residents and newer Bostonians of color, are going to decide this race. And you have to say at this point, with Ayanna Pressley and Mayor Janey having weighed in on Michelle Wu's side, she has a decisive advantage as we go into the closing stretch, but not game over yet.
Right. And I think, just to kind of fill out a little bit of the background for listeners to this point about, how decisive black and brown voters will be in the race, we should just say that in the preliminary, both of you were supporting black women who ran strong races and finished just, I guess you'd say, outside of the money, finishing third and fourth. John was supporting Andrea Campbell, and Joyce backed Kim Janey in the race. And so where do black voters fit in now? And I guess I wonder, on that level, there's one interesting wrinkle that's developed. I feel like there hasn't been a lot of focus to the race so far. There's going to be debates starting this week. But one issue that's emerged has to do with this question of where you're from, or more specifically, whether you were born in Boston or not. And Essaibi George, as people may know, grew up in Dorchester, was raised there. Michelle Wu grew up in Illinois, came here for college. And when she was asked recently on GBH radio if that matters, Annissa Essaibi George said, "It's relevant to me, and I think it's relevant to a lot of voters." Now that sort of created a big stir And, in some ways, maybe it's not the most important issue, but there's a lot, it seems to me, to unpack there. And one thing I wonder, it talks about sort of maybe talk about how the politics have changed in the city, who's voting in elections, who's here. But one other interesting wrinkle is there was some survey work by my colleague Steve Kozel at Mass Inc. polling group that showed a pretty decent share of voters actually agreed with Anissa Essaibi George. They think that is important. And there was even a larger share of black voters that sort of, responded to that issue about having somebody born here. What do you two make of that issue?
Well, let me just say that turf has always been an issue here in Boston, always. I'm from Southie, I'm from the Berry, it's always been.
Right.
The problem with turf sometimes is when it's sort of triangulated to, be oppressive or exclusive, and that's where Boston gets the bad reputation. There's been, desegregation of housing, desegregation of schools, and they all run in different, territories, so to speak. It's changing a little bit. But turf is very important here. However, the first black governor was from Chicago. Our first elected congresswoman was from Chicago. And so, I don't think to the voters that the, importing from different place makes more difference than what you're going to do once you get into office. So in a way, I don't particularly like the signaling of, I have more knowledge because I'm from here than you who come from somewhere else. It's the carpetbagger theory.
Right.
And I just don't like it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you make of that, John? I mean, it strikes me that, in some ways, maybe Joyce is right. Maybe there's the Chicago edge you get in Massachusetts politics. But kidding aside, it does seem like it's not proving to be a huge hurdle for Michelle Wu. And frankly, we've seen also, a lot of data showing this is not the same city it was 30 years ago, certainly 50 years ago. A lot of people in Boston, a lot of voters did not grow up here. Even some who did grow up here, like the two of you, I think don't sort of view things in that parochial lens of you need to have, been born and raised here. So I just wonder if it's kind of providing a little bit of a window into how things have changed in the city. The fact that she's, that Anissa Essaibi George sort of made that statement, and I don't know if it's hard to say whether it's backfired. It certainly, I don't think it's played that well.
I don't think it's played well for George. And I would say sort of bottom line is George has to draw better distinctions between Michelle and herself. Like she's just plain got to draw better distinctions if she's going to mount a real challenge in this final, and she's going to have to start doing it at the debates. Now, as far as the lifelong issue goes, it doesn't matter to me. I'm a lifelong Roslindale, West Roxbury Bostonian, and it doesn't matter to me. I want the best. I want the best person in office. But I would note a few things on it. The first is Michelle Wu is very much where the sort of center of Boston is today. The majority of Boston was not born and raised in Boston.
That's right.
Boston is getting younger. Boston is getting more progressive. And so Michelle Wu has actually got her finger on the pulse of where Boston is today.
And maybe even more specifically, I think where it's going, right? They always say, like, you want to run a race about the future, and
it's only going to expand. Now, but let me say this, because I thought this was sort of interesting politics behind Anissa's comment. I think a lot of folks wrote it off as sort of maybe an off-the-cuff play to her base that, was just, poorly timed, poorly delivered. I saw polling, and I'm sure Joyce did too, throughout this race that showed that it mattered to lifelong Bostonians if you were a lifelong Bostonian candidate. Like that mattered to lifelong Bostonians. And I saw polling throughout the race that showed pretty clearly it mattered to Black, brown, and white Bostonians the same. If they were lifelong, it mattered to them that they were lifelong. I think Anissa may have actually been trying to do that to make a play for lifelong Black and brown Bostonians. Now, I think the interesting thing that I've never seen on that polling is, does it matter to a lifelong white Bostonian that a white candidate is lifelong, but maybe not as much if it's a Black candidate, and vice versa? Does it matter to a lifelong Black candidate that a Black candidate is lifelong, but maybe not a white candidate? Or do all lifelong Bostonians just prefer a lifelong Bostonian regardless of race? Like, that gets kind of crazy on the politics of it all. But I would just say, I think maybe she's making a play to Black and brown voters. I'm not sure it necessarily would work. And I think she's got to draw better distinctions, because whether it's Ayanna, Rachel, or Governor Patrick, all three merged a coalition of New Boston progressive voters and Black and brown voters to win over 2/3 of the vote in Boston. And
that's right.
If Anissa doesn't figure that out, she's done.
Well, let me just say this, because I thought a little bit different. I agree with you, John, but I thought for sure she was saying to old Boston, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. And I also, think that she was saying, I've been here all my life. There was a lot of subliminal messages I saw in what Anissa said.
I mean, this whole issue about identity, I find in this race in particular, is a really kind of mixed up set of kind of facts. With, both of these candidates are daughters of immigrants, so there's a certain Marty Walsh was as well. But there's a certain kind of irony, again, in that play by Anissa for kind of the homegrown candidates or homegrown voters. I guess it shows you can kind of establish that rootedness pretty quickly, since she, was born here, but her parents weren't. And so I think you're right that they're playing, sort of trying to figure out the right way to kind of maybe finesse that issue, and I think I sort of take John's point too, that there was some appeal in that by Anissa to Black voters. It wasn't just a play to kind of the sort of white Dorchester Southie base.
But the bottom line is, Anissa has to do better at drawing distinctions, and
right.
And quite frankly, not through no fault of Anissa's, Michelle doesn't have to draw distinctions to the same effect because she is the front runner right now.
Right.
And so Anissa's got to do better at drawing distinctions, while Michelle, just if she continues to rack up endorsements, it will be game over.
Right. And I think your point about, you need white progressives and Black voters, that coalition has been the ticket that we've seen in Boston, and I think that's the big challenge for Anissa Essaibi George right now.
So let me chime in on something here. I'd be fascinated to hear Joyce's take on this. I agree. It's been the recipe for, you could go all the way back to Ralph Martin's election, certainly Andrea Cabral. But the recipe has been, New Bostonian progressives plus voters of color. That gives you over 60% of the vote. It would have been fascinating if Willie Gross ran, because the math he was going to try to put together was old school traditional Boston with Black and brown voters as the 2/3 to get there. I don't know that he would have been successful, but it would have been fascinating because I was seeing there that he would have had, cops in West Roxbury with his house signs and seniors in Mattapan with his signs on their lawns, for whom he resonated. But he probably couldn't have got there, but it would have been interesting to see.
Well, let me just say one thing, too.
And just for people, before you do, Joyce, let me just help listeners who may not know that we're talking about the African-American former police commissioner of the city, Willie Gross, who seemed to flirt very briefly with the idea of jumping in this race before not. He's now actually, though, kind of spearheading an outside super PAC that's raised a lot of money and is supporting Anissa Essaibi George. So
And
with that.
let's be fair that Anissa has distanced herself from it because of the association of one of the donors with the Trump organization, but Jim Davis. But let me go back to the Willie Gross factor. I think that his game plan was to attempt to, bring people together, and whoever wins this will have to bring folks together. Nobody's going to be totally left on the outside of this if you want to win this race. You've got to transverse communities. You have to transverse turf to get this vote. And I think that Essaibi George has clearly framed her campaign. Now, I agree with John that she has to work on the messaging, but she's clearly framed that she is moderate, a centrist, however you want to say it, very different than Wu. She's got the police. She's got, you can see by the people that she has with her. Now she's got the union. I feel that's all Marty Walsh. That is all Marty Walsh. And I joked with somebody the other day, and I said, I'm going to ask Marty if his mother is running her campaign, because
well, we know she voted for her, and we saw them.
We saw that big thing, but again,
yeah.
We know where they stand, and right now it is not a good thing to seem like you're standing with the police at a time of police reform. And also, Willie Gross, with all due respect, has come under fire for his association with Dennis White, which is the commissioner who did not make it to commissioner for more than a week, I guess,
right.
Because people wonder if what he knew.
Let's talk just a little bit about the sort of bigger picture of how the two candidates are trying to frame issues to the degree that we're hearing about that. It seems like Anissa Essaibi George, starting right away on the night of the preliminary in her victory speech, has tried to hammer away at this idea that she is really more grounded in the practical issues facing residents and facing the city. And she's really tried to paint Wu's ideas about, free fares on the MBTA or rent control as kind of pie in the sky stuff. I guess, is that criticism valid? And is it resonating, or do voters, I think, actually, again, kind of like Wu's big ideas? She, of course, would call them, kind of bold aspirations, not pie in the sky.
I like Anissa because I know she's done the work around homelessness, around the schools, getting social workers in the schools and doing those kinds of things. So, I can point to things that she has done. And that's what you want in a candidate, that you can say, well, I know she did this, that, and that. And Wu has also. And, it's hard for me to say who would do the best. I think I kind of give the edge a little bit to Michelle Wu because, the tea demonstrations, rent control is, I know it's the big boogeyman here, but for someone to say, well, let's look at it, but these words are what bothers me. Police defunding, you got to be kidding. We're not talking about defunding the police. That's the wrong thing. Rent control, maybe you really are talking stabilization, but a lot of the developers and so forth have said, rent control. I think she's very brave in coming out with some things that people feel a little prickly about. But in a time like this, are saying, well, we need more than what we have if we're going to come through this pandemic. And so I think they both have some, strong suits. I do think that, as I said, that Anissa is sort of running center of left, and the embracing of the police at this time is not going to be resounding with Black and brown communities who've, had issues with the police. Now, we've not had issues like other cities with the police. In fact, this is where community policing grew, right here, and we can grow again. But I think that people look at that and, see a too cozy relationship with an institution that needs reform.
So what do you think, John, about this sort of framing of the race, that the way Essaibi George has tried to position things?
So this is the place I think Anissa has to go to draw these distinctions that I keep referencing. But I think it is. I think it's not landing for really one main reason, and that is, again, the sort of like where the city is today, where it's going. They want candidates, the city, that the new Bostonian, sort of majority or plurality wants candidates with the big picture vision, who are thinking about climate change, who are thinking about transportation, who think of public health before they think about public safety, because they view it as inextricably linked. And so to one degree, Anissa is drawing these distinctions, but really they're probably landing best with voters who are already with her. And then there's a second problem here, which is, I think, for Anissa, and again, it's not her doing, but I think she's also trying to say in this critique, Michelle's, pie in the sky, and I'm someone who knows
academic.
And academic, and I'm someone who knows how to get stuff done. But the fact is, anybody who's met Michelle Wu knows, while she is very aspirational and big picture on these issues, she's also a city councilor who's been incredibly effective. And I think anyone who meets her knows she knows her way around City Hall. She knows how to get stuff done, and she knows how to throw elbows when she needs to. And so it's not as though the sort of subtext of Anissa's comments are really landing in a way that I think is believable to undecided voters, to Black and brown voters, and to anyone who's not already with Anissa.
Right. And you do, you do have to only look at things like the T, where there is now a pilot program going with free bus fare. And since the time that Michelle Wu first launched that idea a few years ago, several cities, in Lawrence, Brockton, a couple of other places in the state have begun experimenting with it, not to mention other cities around the country. So it was kind of aspirational, but some of those aspirations are starting to kind of become reality. And I think you're right, John, that it's something that's resonating, again, for a good chunk of the electorate. There may be some who roll their eyes at it, but those are probably people that Essaibi George already has, in her camp. So it's not clear, this is always, the old cliche that politics is the game of addition, and you're looking for growing the kind of solid base you already have.
I think that most people right now have made up their minds. I think that the Black and brown community also, there's two ways to think of, they look at Anissa and automatically they say, oh, yeah, she's for the police. I don't want to hammer that, but I'm just saying, to John's point, that she's got to message that a little bit better. I message it if I want to say that they're doing a good job. I just wrote a column the other day and I said they do a good job. They're doing a good job in the middle of the pandemic, but not so good job policing themselves.
Yeah, I've always thought of mayor's races as somewhat the inverse of presidential races. In presidential races, we always see you, depending on what party you are in, you've got to run to the left or the right to make it through that primary season. And then you got to move back to the center when you're in the final. In Boston,
That's right.
It's sort of always been you run to the middle in the prelim with the lower turnout. And then we know the turnout goes up in the final. And then you've got to sort of run more to the left.
That's right.
And Anissa kind of reverse engineered her path here, I think, because it's what she had to do.
Oh, that's amazing.
But, I think, to your point, it creates all sorts of trouble for her right now, because she's doing all she can do to get back to the middle when you really want to be moving left to center in the final.
Well, we will follow the debates that are coming up, where the candidates will have a chance to further try to define where they stand, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle what are going to be really the several, most high visibility moments they're going to have to voters, which are still ahead of us. So I think we will leave it at that, and I want to thank you both for a great conversation. John Connolly and Joyce Faribault-Bowling, thanks again for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael.
And thanks again to everyone for listening to another episode of the podcast from CommonWealth Magazine. We will see you next time.